All right, how's it going, everybody? Glad you could join us today. We're here to talk about innovation in sports performance, especially as it relates to data and then also the rendering of that data through immersive media. So we'll call it VR, AR, XR, MR, or any other blank R out there. A lot of other realities out there, but it's the combination of leveraging the emerging trends with immersive media and now the ubiquity of data and the ease of capture that we really are here to discuss today. And then it's rendering that data not only in venue at the fan experience, but also in broadcast, cross-platform, not just on TV, but on your phone, on your tablet, on your Magic Leap headset, whatever it might be, right? Immersive media takes many different forms. And so I think our job as sports professionals and sports innovators is to figure out how we use that data and improve our storytelling so that the audience can digest, consume, and use it, whether they be an athlete, whether they be a coach, a fan, or even a sponsor. And I think we'll have a good conversation today. We'll discuss a lot of these topics through the panelists here, and then we'll open it up to conversation. So please don't hesitate to throw out a question here and there. We'll try to pick them up as we come along. So we're fortunate to have a very diverse panel, actually. It's not very homogenous. We've got people that leverage data in a lot of different ways. First, we got Coach Tim Adams. Coach is a super coach by trade, but has coached people at all various levels on all sports, notably a lot of NFL teams, NHL teams, Olympians, both physically and mentally, right, to help them perform at their peak. Next to Coach, we have Dave Anderson. Dave is a former NFL wide receiver, played for multiple teams across a great 6-year career, played college in Colorado State, and then went on to get an MBA from USC, and then joined Second Spectrum immediately thereafter, which is a deep data analytics company that has really cut its teeth in sports and has done some groundbreaking stuff, most recently with the NBA and other sports leagues out there. Next to Dave is Courtney Brunius. He's the Associate Director of USC Sports Business Institute and instructor at USC Marshall. Courtney has been in sports a lot of your academic career, I would say, right? Looking at everything from sports-anchored real estate developments to data and analytics to cross-platform studies. And then next to Courtney, we have Aaron Stanton, and Aaron is the founder of the VR Institute of Health and Exercise. And I think what's really fascinating about that is he's studying how you leverage immersive media to increase your calorie burn, right? How do you level up existing exercises? How do you gamify exercise for health and performance? So we have a really good diverse set of people here that I think will give us some perspective across the entire industry. And so we'll start with Coach Adams. And I guess the question we'll put out to everybody is one, how is data used in your profession, right? Specifically, what are the things that you're seeing right now? And then tell us how you look at immersive media and that blend, right? Because it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. I don't think there's any right answer to this question, but it'll be good to get your perspective. And we'll start with you and go down the line.
All right. So for me, data is pretty universal. I'm looking at everything around performance and performance for the athlete in particular, and how that athlete can then ultimately be able to impact the team's performance. But a lot of what I do with data has to do with giving feedback directly back to that athlete in terms of how they're performing, how they're interacting with either the ground, their ground reaction force. It could be their heart rate in terms of recovery, it could be heart rate variability, it could be body temperature, it could be a variety of different markers that we utilize. There are a trend right now, obviously with concussion, has to do a lot with accelerometers and measuring load to the relationship of impact to the head. We see a lot of that. The other thing that I think in terms of data that I'm interested in particularly would be around just the ability to recover, the ability to regenerate, the ability to improve the performance or be ready to perform. And so there's a lot of markers that I use for that as well in terms of pre-exercise routines, in terms of post-exercise recovery and regeneration. So for me, data is super important in terms of the individual. And then I also look at data from a totality perspective in terms of team, injury, prevention, man games lost, things of that nature, as well as how does the individual impact the team in terms of missed assignments, in terms of decision making, in terms of their focus, their attention, things of that nature as well. So,
Coach, you mentioned something earlier in our conversation about the feedback loop and how you coach and the ability to train and professional athletes and get them that information to improve their game.
Right.
Do you see ways that immersive media are helping you improve that feedback loop and give them actionable steps to become better?
Well, I think in terms of access to the data becomes really important, right? And so one of the things like I did with the LA Kings was be able to take the data and then provide it feedback to them almost instantaneously in terms of what their load was, what their performance was, how they're performing at a certain situation. In our conversation, we were talking about in terms of skill acquisition, the one thing I think the NFL does better than any other sport is this ability to create that feedback loop, to accelerate the feedback loop. You watch video of your performance, you get critiqued on that video, then you go out and you walk through how to do it correctly, then you come back and rewatch how you did that from a video perspective, get more critique and feedback on that, and then you go back out and do it full speed. And then that gets critiqued as well. So there's multiple times during the day at which you're having the opportunity to get this feedback, right? And that's just from skill acquisition, and we're not even talking about the data that's going along with what you're doing in the weight room, what you're doing out on the field in terms of the amount of force you're producing, the amount of foot contacts you have, amount of contacts at hitting you have, things of that nature, right? All of that data is being collected, and what you do with it, is I think what makes a great team, a great coach from a coach who's overwhelmed by all this data, right?
Critiqued is a very nice word to call it. I think it's more like being cussed at or MF or
yeah. Those are the more.
I've never been so scared for my job in my life as playing in sports.
Well, speaking of coaching, Dave, you're a professional athlete. You've been a student. You've worked at a sports startup, and now with the work at the Gaines Group, right, really driving business across sports and technology.
Yeah, I went to SC after this whole scandal, so my parents didn't pay for me to go to school, which is nice. So it worked out really well.
I thought you were one of those for sure.
Courtney, on the other hand, is still getting subsidized.
He's
been letting people in on sports business scholarships for months now. So immersive data and all these words. So like my background have been on the field and then been actually going into academia and studying it. It's a little jaded, skewed, and also I try to make sure it's a little more fun, data in general. I think the first thing you need to remember is data is soulless and void of a personality. It doesn't care who you are. It's made to be objective. And so therefore it's up to the human to give it some actual kind of flair, some actual insight, or to pull out the insight, to understand it and also apply it. I think too often people are like, oh, here's my spreadsheet. Now it's your problem. And this person already has a full-time job, and they already use insights, and they already have a long memory and intuition and experience that allows them to make decisions, and you're not helping them when you just provide them data. You need to actually listen to them and understand what questions and issues they have, and find data that helps them answer those questions. Too often you see in sports that they say, oh, this is a game-changing data set or game-changing technology. And I've been on a field and caught many passes. I never changed the outcome. I barely changed the outcome of a game, let alone a data set or technology can change the outcome of a game. So that always kind of like scares me. The immersive part, I think, is what I find the most interesting and fun, though, because that is very individual, and I think that's what data really has a chance to do, is allow for personal kind of individual experiences. What I find interesting is different from everyone on this panel for reasons that some may know and some may not know, but that's my experience and what I'm allowed to do. And for the first time in a long time, if you think about like communication in general, if you look at like television, it was about putting one thing and spreading it to the masses. We all saw everything the same exact way. Well, now with our phones, we can all experience our own thing our own way. So it's about getting one thing to one person, and data really allows you to do that. So I think that's what excites me about immersive opportunities. It can be with a headset, it can be on your phone, it could be with gloves on. It's just going to be all sorts of stuff, and data is going to be the glue between those experiences.
You know, as a former athlete, what do you think the implications are around your training data and the privacy of that data? Is it yours? Is it the team's? And can you really kind of talk about some of the situations we'll have to address in the industry coming
This
forward?
is, so Jeb and I are both former players and so members of the NFLPA, the Players Association that represents all players. This is an ongoing conversation we've had with their leadership in terms of who actually owns it and in what ways. And I think that's a real question, is ownership of data is an awkward thing in today's day and age, in that we all should own our data, but Google knows more about us than we do, at least our search history. Facebook knows more about Google from this perspective, and then YouTube knows more. Well, I guess that is Google still. But your different platforms know more about you in different ways and different facets than you know about yourself. And that tends to happen kind of as teams as well. You're talking about a coach. They understand, your speed count, the amount of load you had, the amount of reps you did in this, and all that stuff. There's some data that's the teams. They should have that. That's the coaches, and that's their feedback that they should be giving me. From a player perspective, I should just have access. What I do with it, that's my issue. Ownership, it should be known that anyone that is involved can own it, but not the outside. But access is the key, less of ownership.
Especially when broadcasters start using that data and then leveraging it in game, right, in the distribution of that feed, and then again monetizing that data through the different immersive media elements that are available to them. So with that, I got to flip to you, Courtney, and get your perspective on this kind of whole evolution of the concept of the player data and monetization of it, and where we go with that.
Sure. I mean, obviously there are a number of different cascading impacts from data that gets put out there from wearable devices to data that organizations collect on the fans that come through their gates for any type of sporting event. And from my perspective, what I find really interesting is how all this data is being utilized. From a performance standpoint, we've already heard how important data is when it comes to training athletes and getting them to perform at their highest level. And that has an impact ultimately on the bottom line of any of these sporting leagues that are involved in making sure that their athletes are performing the best they can, because fans are coming in there on a day-to-day basis and they want to see athletes perform at a high level. And if you have athletes that are missing games or missing seasons or hurt when they're performing, obviously your product that you're putting out there on the field is not as engaging, is not as exciting for the consumer as otherwise it could be. So this data that gets created through all these devices that are tracking individual athletes from their training to how they're performing during any type of competition helps you put that better product on the field. And ultimately, the hope is that it would affect your bottom line in a positive way, because you have a more consistent product along the way. But then when you look at it from the standpoint of a consumer, data is being collected there as well, where consumers that are either logging on to watch a sporting event through some type of digital platform, whether it's their phone or their computers or anything else like that, leagues, teams are collecting all this information about all of these consumers. They have more information because they can individualize the type of content that you're getting from an advertising perspective. They can reach you in other outlets that otherwise they wouldn't do if they just are advertising to you through traditional media. And this allows them to engage with you on that more personal level that Dave was talking about, which ultimately the hope is you be able to generate a higher ROI from a business perspective, because you have that increased engagement that you otherwise wouldn't have through traditional means. So I think the data impact on sports from a business perspective is along many different levels, and it can go from performance side to the consumption side to even attending games, the at venue side. And I think that figuring out exactly how best to utilize this data and maximize your ROI is the goal for all the leagues and the teams, and it's still working its way through the system to figure out exactly the best way to do all these things.
Courtney, you mentioned personalization, right? And how distributors can personalize the feed to the audience they're watching, how trainers can personalize the exercise to really get the most out of the athlete. But what I love about what Aaron's doing, he can personalize the immersive feed to get the thing you're most scared of and have it chase you to drive your caloric and output, right? I think that was one of the things that I think was super interesting as we were discussing that is the application of you leveraging that immersive media and then the data to then go for kind of the end goal of a direct good that comes out of that. So spend some time talking about that.
Yeah, sure. So my perspective on data comes from a slightly different angle. In that I started, my past prior to the VR Health Institute is I had a data mining and AI company that we sold to Apple back in 2014, and it was focused on a different industry, which is publishing and the use of data application and publishing. Which it's funny because we used to use Moneyball all the time in our pitches to our publishers about why it is you should be paying attention to data in an industry that's historically not had much to do with it. But what my interest now is actually much more kind of on the granular in terms of like. The reason I see VR and AR as such an interesting piece of exercise equipment is that it's the first generation of exercise equipment that allows the computer the exercise equipment itself, knowing what your targets are and what your current biometric state is, to then take an action that makes your exercise better or worse. So like my treadmill in the past could know that I had a heart rate of 120 and then I wanted to hit a heart rate of 160. But there's not a whole lot I can do about it. And so now, though, VR is an exercise system. You can have monsters that increase in their aggressiveness. Use attacks that force you to do more squats, or back off when you need to hit your cool down period, or if you're like recovering from a heart surgery or something like that, and you need to have a heart rate band. And so it's what we refer to as the AI perfected exercise loop. And I think it's going to start in the VR and AR and the immersive space, through this really rapid response of like collecting data on the fly and then be able to react to it on the fly as well. And then it's going to start in the AI, AR and VR space because that's the first place where there's a lot of flexibility in the content, and then it's kind of going to work its way backwards into traditional exercises. And so that's where the data pipeline for me is the most interesting.
And what do you think of VR versus AR and the applicability of that in your medium?
Well, I think it's that's a broad question.
It is. Well, that's the thing I think we all wrestle with in immersive media is that people describe it as a number of different things, right? AR, VR, MR, right? And the hardware that's associated with all that.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the challenge is that, there's not a set standard that everybody likes. And so, I think the data, the user has to really personalize that output for the hardware almost, right? So do you have an opinion on which is more effective for your use case?
Well, I think I'm a huge fan of augmented reality in the sense that I think that as time goes on, I'll say something that at least in the VR industry is pretty controversial. I don't believe that VR is particularly disruptive in the concept of gaming. Like, I see it as a very powerful technology, but it doesn't have the characteristics you traditionally need a product to have to fit the disruptive curve. But AR does. AR has the ability through iterative design to kind of replace all the functionality of the current generation of gaming and also other things like its impact on exercise. So I think AR is going to be tremendous, but it's a few years out, right? And so the things that we're going to use VR basically to find out what you can do with it. And then by the time AR arrives, we'll be ready to actually deploy it in a way that's really useful for people.
Very good. And when we think about, Dave, I'm going to kick it to you real fast in terms of kind of the absolute training, right? If we narrow it down to how do you improve your game as a professional athlete, is there a technology you've seen in development somewhere or something that you've heard of that you think really has a chance to help improve, whether from a wearable that helps you get specific data or from kind of the immersive media medium that helps you get the data?
Yeah, I think the best part about a lot of these technologies, whether it's, I would say, once you're really training, you can't have a headset on. So VR is kind of out. It's tough to hold your phone up and train and do anything, so kind of AR is really not there yet. But the other aspects of data and technology, I think there's almost enough out there depending on what you are lacking, right? So this is where you want to work with a coach. Because when I was playing in high school, I thought I was Terrell Owens. And then when I was in college, I thought I was still kind of like Terrell Owens. And then I got to the NFL and I realized, well, Terrell Owens is in the NFL. I can't be Terrell Owens. He looks a little different than I do. And I can't play like him. So I need to play like Dave Anderson. I need to figure out what I do. I need to talk to a coach to see what skill sets I'm missing. And I think that's where technology can really help you is if your coach tells you, hey, you need a better stance start. Well, there's an app for that, like literally. Or your basketball player, your shot, you could use more arc on your shot because you're short. We need to get up and over people. Well, there's an app called Know a Basketball. You can use that. It'll tell you about the arc on your shot. Tennis. You need more distance on your forehand. Well, there's a motion capture system we have that can help you with that, right? I think that's where it really comes in. Universally, there's also stuff that I would say in the exercise equipment that's getting pretty cool. I mean, you look at like Peloton. Everyone's going to be saying this is the Peloton of treadmills. This is the Peloton of Versa climbers. This is the Peloton.
Would you say Peloton is immersive?
Close.
How wide? Close.
Close. Close.
Almost.
It's more than a bike. It's more immersive than
I would say it's
a
engaging,
steady bike.
Yeah.
not necessarily immersive.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think with the NBA playoffs happening right now, and on the ESPN app, they're doing a coach mode or an AR mode where you toggle on enhanced stats, right? And I think we're going to get to a point very fast where how much is too much, right? How much does this visualization and the AR graphics impede the actual entertainment factor of the game? So Courtney, could you talk about what's going on with how the data is being visualized in the broadcast that you've seen, and then the monetization implications of that as well?
Yeah, I think when you look at it, you have to look at it from two different perspectives. Obviously you have the at-home experience where you can utilize AR. The Clippers are using system through Second Spectrum where they're utilizing AR to overlay graphics on what the consumer is seeing. That's a way to bring that sort of more immersive experience to the fan and create something that's a little bit different than the traditional viewing experience. Then you look at it, what some teams are doing, Sacramento Kings being an example, at venue, where you can use the AR experience where you're utilizing the app that the team created, and the fan that's in the venue can access replays. They can access the opportunity to put their phone up and on the action and see sort of the stats of the players that they're watching. I know Major League Baseball is working to do that as well. And you're creating these other opportunities for fans to engage at a higher level or more in-depth level with the sport that they're enjoying. But that type of approach isn't perfect for everyone. Some people just want to go to the game and watch the game. They don't need all these high-tech options to enhance their experience. And I think one of the things that teams and leagues need to be aware of is they need to create multiple pathways for different fans who have different interests. And some fans are going to want to have that heads-up experience that we talk about where they just want to watch the game. And then there are other fans that are going to be there, especially probably amongst millennials, where they'll have that head-down experience where they're in their phone. They'll look up the action every once in a while, but they want to utilize their phone to engage at a higher level. And I think that that's where we're seeing some of the technology make a big difference. And obviously at the underlying level, there's a lot of data that comes from all this that's able to create an even better experience for the fans and create a better return for the organizations as well.
It's interesting. I think, right now the AR is showing a lot of just stats and what's happening from a performance level and just making of shots or passes or tackles, where it may be. But eventually it's going to have the biometric data. You can see how fast your favorite quarterback's heart rate's beating, right? Or how gassed they might be, or how they should come out of the game. Coach, I'm going to ask you from a coaching perspective. I think you've seen world-class athletes push through limits that they've never found. How do you think the impact of a fan being able to see like this guy's at his limit might impact how you coach on the field during performance, or you train up to that level, and then how can you maximize that experience so fans can appreciate what's actually going on?
Can I add to that question? Because I'm actually really curious. Also, what does it do to if the opposing team knows your player's stats?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. It's a very slippery slope that we're all going to have to address very, very soon.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to like who owns the data, right? And for me too, and kind of along this line is, as a coach, I think it's really valuable to know the data, and because of the free agent market, it's the more you know about the player, the better decision you can make about whether you want to bring that player into your organization. For example, we're talking heart rate, you're talking load, you're talking things of that nature. And now you're capable of knowing, is that player taking the play off? And how many plays did that player take off? And the reality is, it happens every game. It happens a lot, right? And as a fan, I hear it all the time when I'm, and I don't watch a ton of sporting events, but when I do, I hear it all the time. It's like, oh my God, that guy is just, he's loafing it. He's taking plays off, or like, oh, why did he make that decision or this decision? And I'm sitting there going, well, you have no idea what's going through that guy's head. Have you ever been in a situation where you've got, you know, a 255-pound linebacker barreling down at you, and you need to make a decision quickly, and you don't know where that person's eyes are. You don't know what information that they've actually taken in, right? And that's the challenge with all of this as you're collecting data is, are you really getting the right data, and are you actually measuring the right things? And to me, that is a question I think that needs to be addressed in all of this is you know, are you actually measuring the right thing? Are you collecting the right data, right? And I think even you take a step back from that, the algorithms that are being utilized in collecting these data is also needs to be in question as well. And so for me as a coach, I want as much data as I can on the athlete, because to me, if I know that there is a discrepancy between their left leg and right leg, then I can either address that or I can pass on that, right? Like if it's a free agent and I know this kid's prone to injuries and they got such a big discrepancy between one side or the other, I'm like, well, is my staff, or am I, as the strength coach, going to be able to put the time in to be able to correct that in time for training camp, in time for the season? And I may not be able to.
It might be able to be a BS meter for the color analyst who's saying, oh, he's just a high motor guy. And the data showing, no, he's actually the fastest guy on the field. Right? Physically the fastest guy on the field. Right?
And you know what's interesting about that too is that, and this is where the data becomes important, is there's guys that look fast, that they're moving their arms fast, they're moving their body fast, but they're not covering any ground. And that's the dichotomy between being fast and not fast, is you can look like you're moving your body fast, but you're not covering any ground. You're not fast. You look quick. That's it. And so then it becomes like, what's the truth in that scenario, in that situation? Right?
I don't think I was either quick nor fast.
You used to say I wasn't loafing, I was efficient.
That's right.
That's
The
I don't
O-line
have
spot
to do
is
Some
a
people can't
form
be
of
helped.
running only known to the offensive linemen of this world.
I think there are also two things when we talk about this. I mean, obviously we talked a little bit about the privacy issues, but imagine a situation, and I'd be interested in hearing from Dave and Jeb about this as former athletes, but the teams that you're playing for are collecting all this data. And imagine that they have sleep monitors on you, because obviously sleep is a major part of recovery and in terms of high performance. So are they going to know if you're out late at night?
So the Seahawks got in trouble for that, actually.
Yeah, they tried to do that, and then it got pulled back. So there's technically, you're allowed to do once you enter the facility. Once you're off the facility, there's rules, but there's probably some
When
ways
you play for
coaches
Coach
get around
Gruden,
it.
he'll probably say you're sleeping too much. That guy's notorious for 3 hours of sleep a night. So he's like, why aren't you in here earlier? But that's exactly right. People are trying to do that now, doing door to door on the athlete and how that impacts performance.
And professional athletes, obviously, they have the players' unions that are protecting them. But when it comes to amateur athletes, I work at a university. The collegiate athlete doesn't have anybody looking out for their rights for that. So, what can be tracked? Probably everything, because who's going to really push back on it from a collegiate perspective? A couple of years ago, I believe Nike went and entered into a contractual relationship with Michigan. And as part of that contractual apparel deal, Michigan owned all the rights to the data that came from any type of wearable devices that the athletes, wore while they were training. who was representing the athletes from that side? Because they didn't have any say in terms of the contractual relationship Michigan went into with an apparel company like Nike. And I think that's a big issue that's going to really rise more as we see more and more of these deals happen, and this information become more important in terms of how negotiations are done or how athletes are being seen in terms of who owns this data.
You know, it's interesting as we take all these conversations and apply it to what's coming down the pipeline in sports, right? Because there's going to be more digital distribution of content, more rights holders from deep tech companies that are going to be doing more and more things with broadcast feeds, and then, you know, we have to bring up the gambling aspect, right? And how player performance and the visualization of that data real time matters. Because again, if you're watching a game with low bandwidth and you have a lot of latency, and they're visualizing data and people are making decisions on that data from a gambling perspective, it becomes a mess really, really quickly. So I'm going to kick that one up to the group if anyone wants to jump on the mic for that one. But how do we look at essentially gambling data and then the distribution of that?
So I just have one story it's my only gambling story, so I have to jump in first. One of my favorite stories about data usage actually is a study that was done, and I'm going to butcher some of the details in this, but the concept is sound, which is that they looked at apparently casinos and things like that, when they do horse racing, they hire people who are experts to set the odds on the different horses. And there's apparently a book that's kind of the Bible of this, where it has information about the success of each horse and then also the mother and father of the horse in different conditions and all this sort of stuff. And the study they did was they took 3 groups of these well-paid experts, and they broke them into three groups, which was, one was they had complete access to the book, one group could choose one set of access to the book, and the third group couldn't choose any access to the book at all, and then they had to make predictions. And then they looked at who was the most accurate, and then they also asked how confident they were in the predictions. And what they found was that they were statistically irrelevant, like they're statistically identical. Having extra access to data did not make any difference whatsoever to them. However, when asked how confident they were, the ones who had no book were like, oh, we have no idea what's going on. And then like the people who were like had the book were like, oh, we're sure. So like I think a lot of times like I said, it's my only gambling data story I've got, so like I had to throw it in there. It's interesting.
The horses aren't getting paid for the data in that book.
No, it's probably not a great analogy for players, but like, but I think it's just interesting because I think there's two sets of dangers in data and application. One is under reliance, and 2 is over reliance, and especially when it comes to things like gambling and stuff like that. There's this mythology that we can take data and we can answer questions with it in a way that minimizes all the risk. And so, but the reality is that the vast majority of data is just used to reinforce existing bias. And so I wonder how much it will have an impact beyond as long as a human is in the loop. I think it gets to the point where somebody like the stock market now, where like there's some sort of automated systems that sit on that data and make decisions statistically based on that data. That could be incredibly, well, it is what it is, but.
Yeah.
So what you just mentioned, that last part that people are only looking for data that basically backs up their current opinions, is 100% correct. And the reasons why bookies pay to opposing people to both give their opinions is because people really don't care. That's the myth about gambling, is it's entertainment value. Look at the number of people that are betting on prop bets in the Super Bowl. Like, they don't care. They're like throwing away like $15, $20. That's the majority of people that are betting. Everyone considers themselves a sophisticated bettor, but about 1% of people are sophisticated bettor, meaning, are you tracking it like you track the stock market? Are you analyzing your bets? Are you seeing if you're ahead of the money line? Are you getting ahead of the crowd? Are you taking advantage of lines and swings and in the derivatives, meaning halftime bets and stuff like that? Because those are what the real gamblers are. If you're like, hey, I'm placing a bet every Saturday on college football games and I'm going to get ahead of this thing, you already lost. Like,
what's the reason that the ringers on FanDuel back in the day, or those other and DraftKings, those guys were cleaning up. They're using algorithms driven by Wall Street to play the daily fantasy.
Yeah.
And they were experts real fast.
I did not.
And all the other casual guys got wiped out. But what about the visualization of some of this data in the broadcast, right? So, you know, where the bets might be being placed, or what's the line? Has the line changed? How does that intertwine with the fan experience, right? So that is it just a toggle you turn on, or how do you guys think that'll manifest itself in kind of the broadcast experience?
I think from just a business perspective, that's just one more thing you can sell sponsorship on and generate another revenue stream. And I think that's really important for anybody that's in the business, where they can find different ways to bring in additional money. And that's where not only utilizing gambling comes into play, but also even the wearable devices. We moved on a little bit from that, but can you imagine this is a special moment sponsored by Tums? If somebody's sitting up there at the free throw line, they have to hit a free throw to tie the game with like 1 second left. So I think that opportunity to overlay that information or that data on a broadcast is just another opportunity for these broadcasters to sell that inventory out to whatever advertisers you want to get in front of the audience that tunes in for that particular game. From a consumer standpoint, obviously it's more information, and whether they want that information or not, I think it's important that that information is available through some type of means that makes it easy for them to engage with it. And I think that's where it's valuable, where the fans that are interested in the specific, data in terms of where the money's coming in, or where, what the spread was on the game and how this particular play is impacting that, that makes it a little bit more interesting for them and maybe creates a higher level of engagement and keeps them tuning in a little bit longer, which ultimately is better off for anybody involved with the game.
Yeah, well, I mean, the monetization is what drives the tech adoption. Right?
Well,
Cool factor only gets you so far.
I was going to say, if there's anything that is like the health industry, which it's gambling, that it's a risk analysis, what has the health industry done? Because you're talking about sports, and hopefully they're not as bad as the hospitals and the health industry, but a lot of times they got to get out of their own way and let people that have experience in this space tell them what to do. Sports teams more than anyone don't want to be told what to do, but what have you seen in terms of risk analysis and how people are, I don't want to say commercializing it, but at least valuing it and evaluating it?
So I really want to answer that question, but I wanted to ask or throw another thought on top of before we left the other topic real fast too. So one of the things I think is very interesting, whether it's talking about gambling or whether it's talking about just enjoyment of the game, I think there's a very interesting thing that happens when consumers are getting targeted information without being fully aware that they're receiving targeted information. There is a lot of examples in things like cryptocurrency and Coinbase and things like this where knowledge of things like maintenance cycles and stuff like that is hugely useful for being able to predict the ups and downs of the market. And I just wonder what it does to a betting community when you can target information to one side of the community that's different from the other side of the community and then influence their betting behavior, right? One of the I have a friend on Facebook that grew up in a fairly conservative area. And she was a good friend of mine, and she comes from a very conservative family, and made a comment and post on Facebook once where she was like, "I'm super annoyed that Google keeps showing ads for adult content on my family computer," and I didn't want to respond to her and let her know that, those are targeted, right? So if somebody didn't turn on a filter somewhere along the line, and it's not random. So not knowing that.
Check your search history as well.
Not knowing that and being exposed to things without knowing it, I think the experience of what you're going to see at a sports, through non-AR where it's not curated, versus something that's just at sitting in or watching the sport non-curated versus watching the exact same experience for 15 different people might be totally different. And I think that's going to be incredibly interesting in terms of everything we're talking about.
You'll be able to choose your own adventure and watch it as you want to watch, basically.
Yeah, right? Who do you want to win?
Right. Well, I think one of the things, and when you're describing AR and broadcast, right, and a lot of people think it's just graphics, but there's a lot more that goes into it, and I think it can be as easy as in a NASCAR race, literally the car number and name tracking the guy around the track. And I think we can all agree that was a big leap forward because you could actually see what was happening. And that's a sport that likes to monetize a lot, right? Everyone's wearing a brand. And then in the NFL, it can be as simple as just the yellow line. And that was really the first mainstream application of the first down yellow line in professional sports. Hockey had the fabled flaming blue puck that I think was really hard to execute but kind of fell flat. But let's go down the line real fast and tell me what's your favorite element of, let's call it AR and broadcast, that you've seen in a sport, in any sport. Start with you, Coach.
watch a lot of TV. But the reality is, I'd have to say the yellow line. It was just,
because it adds way more context
Right.
to what's going on, right?
Yeah.
It makes the 3rd and 3 that much more interesting because you see what's going on and what's happening. It was a big advancement.
I'd say the golf channel and how they do the shot. Like, I have no idea how good they are, just like looping that thing in there and
It could just
dropping
be
it.
just a line.
It's and I don't know if it's right or wrong either, which is even the best part about it. I'm like, that doesn't look right. If you did it on my shot, it'd be like a little duffer. Right.
4.
While I'm pretty sure nobody's going to pick this, and it isn't necessarily my favorite, I do want to give that shout out to the flaming puck, because when the flaming puck came out, this is pre-HD, and one of the things that it did was it made it a little bit easier for consumers to actually see the puck in action, and once HD came along, watching a hockey game on television became a lot easier. But the idea of the flaming puck was, I think it was in the right place. But obviously, it looked a little bit cartoonish when they did it. But if you look at old clips, it's still kind of crazy to watch. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm going to say something a little snarky, partly because I don't have enough knowledge to be able to answer this well. But I'm going to say Pokemon Go.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny. There's all these studies that came out showing that if you the number of steps you took in a given day before the installation of Pokemon Go and afterwards, and it's a substantial amount of people walked a lot farther.
Yeah.
So visualization of walking sport, I don't know, but I just don't know enough about it. I need to watch more sports.
The Olympics, the swimming one, when the line's moving, I like that one too, because you're like, oh, he's not going to catch it.
Yeah, that is. Yeah,
That's a good one.
That one is very cool, and I think one I like is the home run derby, where they show all the home runs they hit in the distance, and it gives you kind of a sense of a place almost, and knowing what these guys are actually doing. Tennis, that one is very cool. Actually knowing what a 120-mile-an-hour serve looks like that one's cool.
And how high it's bouncing. I
Yeah.
think that's the craziest part. If you ever play tennis recreationally and you can see how high the ball kicks up from these professional tennis players, it'll absolutely blow your mind. And you wouldn't know that unless you can now visualize it when you're watching the sport and see, oh wow, that's about 10 feet up. There's no way I could hit that ball.
Yeah. So I think we can all agree that it's pushing the industry further, and it's actually adding value, right? It's not all noise and fluff for the time being, right? And I think, as the industry progresses, we'll continue to iterate on that and find more and more use cases to drive kind of both engagement value and bottom line value.
And what I can say is that as a person who is interested in exercise but has not had as much experience with sports, I find watching sports far more intuitive with the AR overlays that are out there now, right? And I'm kind of that middle ground person in terms of my knowledge about sports, but I've also watched football with people who know nothing about football, and being able to explain to them what things on the AR is highlighting is super easy compared to what it used to be. So
nice. It's funny. I mean, you mentioned about explaining of what's going on in the game, right? And I think with the evolution of what eSports is doing, right? And if you don't know it and you go to one of these big tournaments, you have no idea what's going on. Right, so the explanatory value of the graphics on the screen, if you look at what's happening there, and then also when you look at the NFL on Twitch and how that's a totally different experience with the chat windows and the gamification of where that's going. So we're running up against it. I want to open up for questions, but let's do one last kind of bit here on where we think the blend of maybe esports and traditional sports are going, and how immersive media is going to drive that convergence of the fan experience. I'll start down with you, Aaron.
So the question is how do we think I mean, from my perspective, I like to joke, again, I feel that my bias is about what I'm actually interested in, but I like to joke that I think that someday the stereotype of the video gamer, which is currently the couch potato who's in the basement playing World of Warcraft, will eventually morph into something very similar to that of an athlete. That as these game systems and augmented reality, so that every person you see jogging with a pair of sunglasses actually running, that we will very quickly get to the point where esports and traditional sports starts merging into something that's completely new, right? That the value of esports is not that it's a sport, it's that it's a sport that simply can't exist 100 years ago. And so they take that out of the digital space and you bring it into the physical space like you do with AR, and I think you get I wonder how many of our sports that we have and consider sacred today will look exactly like they do in 200 years, right? I don't know.
Courtney?
I think one of the things that I find most interesting about esports is the way that they deliver their content to their fans. And you mentioned Twitch, YouTube gaming as well. And the way that that engagement level is so different than the traditional experience of watching a competition or a sporting event. And I think that the leagues are learning a lot from the way that these digital properties are able to go directly to the consumer. And they have the chat boxes. You can broadcast yourself playing the games. It's an entirely new world, and it's ultimately could be the future of what consumption of content looks like. And as we move slowly away from the traditional broadcast versions of watching sporting events, I think there's a lot can be learned from the way that esports platforms and esports properties are broadcasting and how these millennials are engaging with the content. So that's where I really see the learning experiences coming from.
So this kind of stems from my days of Second Spectrum, but computer vision is kind of changing the way that sports is not just consumed by people, but not more importantly, differently, consumed by a computer, and then can be distributed by a computer. So if that's what I think where it blends, is that the world where you can click on your television is not too far away, and then I can change the New York Giants into Pam from Progressive versus the whatever Ronald McDonald, and I can do whatever I want. And now that's an advertiser's dream, and I can promise you that's like 3 years away. Yeah.
I don't have a good answer on the esports side of things. To my opinion is there aren't going to be any pro athletes coming out of esports. Sorry, but that's the reality of the situation.
You end on the interesting question.
Well, so I mean, it would be a different game then, right? It will not be the NFL. No. However, what I do see the value of it is the integration of that technology with skill acquisition. And what I see and what's coming down the pipe and what's kind of happening as we speak is the ability to practice without having contact, the ability to create a skill acquisition without having to actually hit another athlete, which ultimately will save careers, longevity, and decrease the CTI. So
That takes the fun out of everything.
that's what you get to do on Sundays, right?
Well, I think one thing, last point on this whole esports side of things is that I think we'll be able to watch a game in the NFL like you watch Madden, right? You have the route overlays, a route tree, and there's things called the fan-controlled football league where fans are supposed to be voting and driving play decisioning. So I think we'll still see that convergence coming down the pipeline, and it's going to be wild, wild west for sure. Well, good.
Probably going to see that in the XFL.
Yeah, we'll probably see a lot of that. I'm actually really excited about what they're going to do. Combine the show power of events in the WWE with the NFL and the entertainment value that it brings. I think we have some good stuff on the horizon. Well, let's kick it to questions. We'll go back there.
Maybe you touched on this, but do you feel like AR and stadium sports will converge so that you watch football with glasses and see stats and other features?
Yeah, I think one of the things I'm seeing right now is that I think we'll have sections of the stadium, like club sections. There might be AR sections where the stadium will provide the hardware, and so that the consumer adoption gets squeezed down to just having to put it on, right? Because you got to trim the learning curve way down. But I definitely think we'll see that. There was a clip going around a bunch of social media outlets of a dragon flying into a baseball game, I think in Korea, and it was awesome. I don't know if you saw it, but I think we'll see a lot more of that. Any opinions from you guys?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is you got to get over that hurdle of sports fandom and consumption is communal by nature. And when you're putting on a big device on your head, then you're sort of taking that communal aspect out of it, and it's more of an individual experience. And once the technology advances a little bit more and you can bring that communal aspect a little bit more into the experience, then I think that potentially that could be the case where you go to a venue and you have all the overlay over there. And that's sort of why the cell phone's such a useful device, because you can do that but also still have that regular experience. But I'm not sure what it looks like going forward when it comes to the head-worn AR devices or setups.
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar and build on that. Is that I actually, so I can say that I know in the in the investment community that I operate in, the kinds of things you're seeing in AR are around shared content, like the ability to geotag something and then have something that you own that real estate and people using that app can see what you've left for people to discover. And I think as it moves into the social component where, whether it's an app provided by a headset provided by the stadium or an app provided by the stadium where everybody at that one event gets either access to certain types of exclusive content that only others at that location at that time can access. So the idea of in-person AR that the audience in the TV can't see. I think there's a whole lot of very interesting things that will be unlocked by the ability for that level of personalized and yet community engagement at the same time. That again, are just stuff you can't do now. You can't have the dragon come over and talk to you, for example. I don't know what that'd look like.
Speak
That'd
for
be a little
yourself.
terrifying, but
A lot of it's going to be bottom line driven because these organizations need people to show up in venue, right? They have to differentiate from what's happening on the couch. And the experience on the couch is so good, or in the bar can be so good, they have to have more reason for people to come. I think with the advancement in the headsets, with the Magic Leap, HoloLens, all these other things, that it's more communal and more AR, MR driven, I think we'll see a lot more of that.
Kiss Cam will never be the same. I don't even know what that means, but
I think you touched on this briefly, but in your opinion, what do you think makes an effective broadcast? I think you touched on it with AR, but AR, what other elements are you, as former pros, do you look for that make an effective, entertaining broadcast?
So that is a very personal question because I love listening to Bill Walton, and he did a Clippers game and didn't know a single one of the Clippers, and I thought it was amazing. He butchered all of their names, and the play-by-play guy was so frustrated, and Bill Walton didn't give a crap and was just giggling and talking about random politics and hippie crap, and I loved it. But my friends thought it was terrible. And so, to ask what's a good broadcast, I go for humor. Where someone else might go for X's and O's, where someone else might. So I think the optionality is really the key, is what you want.
Dave, what do you do as a broadcaster? Because I know you've actually
They
went
did-
on
you've
the
been
mic.
behind-
I did
Mike
Fox,
Golden,
and
haven't
these conservatives don't let you say anything on the microphone. It's crazy.
Well, I would say it's all about storytelling, right? And the broadcasters have to tell a compelling story and leverage everything, the technology at their fingertips to make that story better, and then give people the optionality to personalize it on their own device. I think that's what's going to be happening with alt language feeds, alt angles, whatever. Maybe you'll be able to click on, LeBron and have the LeBron cam and follow him the whole time, or click on the quarterback and watch his point of view. I mean, that's all happening now.
And it's going to really change the broadcaster's capability. I mean, they have to get really savvy with being able to interact with all of these different AR, VR, MR to be able to communicate and tell the story,
Yep.
right? Because it's a different world now than it was before, where you could just talk. Now it's like there's X's, O's. You got a chess set of athletes you can move around on a board that tells a totally different narrative.
Well, everybody loved the Tony Romo broadcast from this past year, right? It was like they had another set of eyes in the booth they hadn't had before, and his capability to call the plays and understand what's going on kind of blew people's minds. And some people tried to replicate that and didn't do so well. But I think that was something that is going to continue to evolve, and then fans will be able to layer in the tech to help that story even more.
Everybody keeps talking about the 5G technology and about the wireless headset, and they're very excited about getting that very soon. But nobody mentions what opportunities or chances we can have from that technology. So, what do you think?
You want to take it? Anyone?
Does anyone want to talk about the edge over here? Do you want to I could say that the opportunities are going to be interesting because you're looking at the Verizons of the world and the although AT&T just got in trouble with some of their 5G stuff, but the Verizons of the world really taking advantage of their ability to push more content, right? I mean, the 5G is essentially they have better pipes, and they can now distribute more technology, distribute more information and stuff to you. I think that stuff's still a ways away, and it's also
like the first thing it's going to solve is like there's a latency in when the play actually happens and when you see it on TV, right? So that's going to go from 7 seconds to 1 second. And there's like all the latency in the data that's tracking data is going to go from, 4.5 seconds to like next to 1 second, right? And then you compare those things up and you don't have to wait a minute and stuff like that. So all those opportunities are going to shrink and become faster, but you still run into what Jeb just mentioned, the storytelling aspect. Just because you can distribute things faster doesn't mean it's going to be better. You still need to like, what are you going to include in that pipe for people to actually watch and consume? So if you have that answer, then I'll give you a business card and we'll make a company and we'll go figure that out, because I don't think that hasn't been solved yet.
Yeah, I always get into something kind of similar to that as well, which is that I actually am a bit vague. I've gone to a lot of, CES and stuff like that and listen to people talk about the revolution that's coming and all that sort of stuff. And I think to me it's the latency question, right? Just you take out those little micro delays in the our daily interaction with stuff. You take that away, and then you also allow it to be much larger in the content push, I think is interesting. But I actually don't know. I used to work in the gaming industry, and there's a lot of discussion back then about the move from DVDs to Blu-ray and like whether or not the original Xbox 360 had enough hard drive sparing DVD capacity and stuff like that. The reality was, when you actually looked across the generations, is that they just expanded to take over the more space is available on the DVDs, and I don't know whether or not we'll just see more of that or not. But I think the latency part of it is something that is going to be fundamentally shifting.
I personally think that the fan wants to know what's it like on the field, what's it like on the ice, on the pitch, on wherever, and if you have the ability to decrease that latency, if you have the ability to push more data, then the experience becomes more real. Like right now, I don't think that the technology is there to have an actual experience because it becomes fragmented right now. Whereas the greater the technology, the more fine the information can be, and it can be more real, if that makes sense.
We got time for one or two more. Ma'am?
I have a question in terms of like performance and skills acquisitions and recovery and so forth. So looking at those data, when you tell your athlete and player, hey, this is happening or whatnot, do you see how are you guys tracking on the end out performance of that data given, because it's dealt with your what you tell them, like
Yeah.
you're harsh with Dave or you're good with him, and the other guy you're soft on him. So on an emotional data, schematics and things, what are you seeing as a coach or even on your patients?
If I understand your question correctly, you're wanting to know how is the impact of data on their emotions.
And also the delivery of that data to your players.
Yeah, so
And then the outcome that you see from that delivery of that data.
that's a great question.
And patient.
I think that's partly some of the sweet science of effective coaching. I mean, being able
Exactly.
to manage people's
Yeah,
personalities,
sure.
honestly, because,
Yeah.
I mean, Dave will tell you as much as I will, guys are treated differently, Minor mistakes get cussed out, while major mistakes get let go just because the way the athlete can handle that information. So part of it's like conveying that information and leveraging data to make it less personalized, more matter of fact, might be helpful.
And that's also a coach-dependent thing, right? There's some coaches that won't hold an athlete accountable because they might be the star athlete, right? And they're coddled. And unfortunately, then the lesser athlete's the one who gets blamed for it, and everybody's like, this is incongruent, and what the F is going on? And it creates a dissonance in the team. And those are the teams that don't make it to the Super Bowl. They don't. They don't make it to the playoffs, right? For me, though, there's a container, and Dave brought it up. I mean, it's like you've got 12 hours sometimes during the season to have access to the player, but when the player leaves a facility in the offseason, you got 4 hours with them. When the player leaves a facility, there's 20 hours that's unaccounted for, and you don't know what they're doing. And heck, I've been on teams where players rolled in at 8 in the morning drunk on a game day, missed curfew, right?
but did they still play well? Sometimes.
They play.
Sometimes all that matters is what's on the field.
Man, he's fast.
He was smooth.
Straight line, but you know.
So I think it is individual dependent, but the reality of the situation is, to me, it comes down to accountability and responsibility. It's my job as a coach to hold the player accountable. It's the player's responsibility to take responsibility. And if there's a disconnect in the communication, then it's on me as the coach. I personally take responsibility for that. However, if the player isn't going to accept what I'm trying to hold them accountable to, then that's their responsibility. So, you know, it's a fine line in that coaching realm for me to be able to impact and influence that player in a way to get them to do something that really they don't want to do. Because the reality is, most players, they don't want to work out in the facility. They want to do as little as possible to get by. And that and that's a generalization.
Meaningful look.
But coach me. I don't know why.
Wrong audience.
And that's not necessarily a negative thing. It's a product of the environment of what was created with free agency, because now everybody has the ability to go somewhere else, and everybody has the ability to say no. And when you give, you know, that's what it's a. I'm certainly a player's coach, but the reality of the situation is the environment is what it is, right? And it's the coach's responsibility to create the environment, and it's the player's responsibility to buy into the environment if they buy into what the coach is selling. And that doesn't happen all the time, right? And so it's human nature, right? You're dealing with humans, and a lot of times it's do it my way or the highway. And sometimes you have to be that way, because if you're not, then you can't create the culture necessary to get everybody's noses pointing in one direction. And for me, data is just another tool to be able to help create direction, if that makes sense.
And then mine is actually almost philosophically and fundamentally different than that. That makes total sense to me. But the very proposition of using the data in exercise through VR or AR is that I can minimize the need for free agency, meaning that, like, if I can figure out a way, what the VR Health Institute really does is we work with San Francisco State University's kinesiology department to study the effects of motivation on chosen exercise, right? And you know, if you set out to exercise for 30 minutes and you get to the end of it and you're like, man, I just one more song, one more round, right? And you go for 45 minutes, you've fundamentally changed how people exercise. But I don't want to do that by necessarily trying to coach them verbally. I want to do them by coaching them through the environment. I want them to have a goal that they want to get to the end of, and the way to get to that goal is very transparent in the game. It's very, very clear, and getting through that goal by byproduct gets them through the exercise that I want them to get through. And so, like, that's the kind of the serious answer. The joking answer actually is that we were considering putting out an April Fool's release where we were going to announce the creation of the Matrix Gyms, which is that you go in and you run on a treadmill, and you wear a VR unit and you run on the treadmill, and it powers the AI that drives what I see in the VR. And we've essentially built the Matrix. And then you have, you know, what is free agency in that respect, right? But you're getting exercise. So, I mean, it's tongue-in-cheek, right? But, like, really, I'm a believer that when used as wisely and at the discretion and choice of the individual, that engineering your environment to achieve what you want can be as effective as a lot of other ways of doing things. And what I don't have the similar experience is I've never coached somebody. And so I don't know how to work with somebody's personality, but I know how to work with my personality in terms of what I like to do for fun. And if I can figure out how to take the thing I don't want to do and make it inherently fun, I'll do more of it.
And I just want to say what I want to say. I want to qualify what I said, because that was a gross generalization, just so you know.
So too late. It's too late. The culture's ruined.
The culture's ruined.
Thanks, everybody. That's a wrap. Appreciate it.
I get one chance.
No, no.